Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Tokens, a podcast focused on interviewing the best crypto founders, market players, and up-and-coming startups that are changing the industry every single Tuesday and Thursday. I'm Jacquelyn Melinek, your award-nominated host and former senior crypto reporter turned entrepreneur, and I'm excited to be here with you all. Now, let's get into it. Today's guest is Matty Taylor, the co-founder and GP at Colosseum. Colosseum is an organization that consists of an online hackathon, accelerator program, and its new venture fund was just recently oversubscribed at $60 million. The most recent hackathon it did had over 8,000 participants across 1,000 projects and 95 countries, with about 10 of those projects going on to its accelerator program. The whole thing is completely free, and while it is not run by the Solana Foundation, they are an LP in Colosseum, and they also help contribute to the online hackathon. There's lots to discuss here. Matty, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
To start off, can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and why you co-founded Colosseum after leaving the Solana Foundation?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Matty, co-founder of Colosseum. Colosseum's a new venture fund accelerator and the organizer of the Solana Hackathon. And so, like you said, I left the Solana Foundation after about 4 years of leading growth there, where I actually started the Solana Hackathon program. So it was a natural evolution to start Colosseum after as an independent organization. And then before that, yeah, I'd worked in crypto and the Ethereum ecosystem. And then before that, worked in payments at Square. So yeah, it's a little bit about myself.
Okay. And would you guys ever kind of expand to other blockchains, or is it always going to be Solana focused?
No, I think when we started Colosseum, we're not Solana maximalists, although we did feel that in order to provide the best accelerator experience and also just grow the ecosystem broadly the most, we wanted to focus on one specific blockchain, and that was obviously Solana in our eyes, just in terms of like the asymmetric upside from what we saw during the bear market to today. And it carried on even through the last 6 months. And so we're just really excited about the developer adoption and specifically startup ecosystem in Solana. So focusing on them.
Awesome. In the intro, I mentioned that Colosseum has 3 pillars, which is its hackathons, accelerators, and the venture fund. You also announced the 60 million oversubscribed venture fund recently. What are you guys going to kind of focus on there? Obviously, early stage startups, but where are you really putting the attention?
Yeah, so we have somewhat of the interesting model where we do run an accelerator. So it's similar to like Y Combinator, if you're familiar, except the difference is instead of a written college-style application to get admitted into that program, we run this online 6-week hackathon that's more like a startup's first engineering sprint. And so all of our focus in terms of like the founders that we choose is through this hackathon funnel where we watch how those teams perform during that engineering sprint, kind of get a sense of what they're trying to do long term, and then obviously admit some of the top winners into our program. And so that's really where we're focused on as a new venture fund.
Is there a reason it is early stage focused opposed to like later stage startups?
Yeah, I think partly it's just our expertise. We're not late stage investors. All 3 of us, the co-founders, myself, Clay and Nate, we've done a fair amount of angel investing in specifically the pre-seed early stage. And so it's just where we've had more experience. Also, we think it's where we can provide the most value, honestly, to the crypto ecosystem is, while we are a venture fund and we do, want to invest in great projects, part of the hackathon's ethos is that we grow kind of the broader developer ecosystem and bring in as many new developers into the ecosystem as possible. And so a lot of them just happen to be starting a company at the same time. And so that's really our mission, is just like start as early as possible, try to grow the pie for the ecosystem as much as possible, and bringing in kind of Web 2 developers, folks from fintech, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. How involved is the Solana Foundation in Colosseum? I know they're an LP. They work closely with you guys in promoting the hackathons, but what is really their role when it comes to working with you guys?
Yeah, so they are one of our LPs. And yeah, we do work with them on running the hackathon. They sort of hired us as sort of the service provider to run these hackathons for the time being. And so yeah, they've been very supportive. Obviously, I worked there for several years, so they're familiar with how we kind of are structuring these events, and they give us a lot of marketing support. But honestly, these hackathons and that we've been running are, an ecosystem wide effort. So we have the Solana Foundation, who's promoting them, as well as ecosystem teams like Super Team, if you're familiar with them, or Dean's List. They're basically these organizations that are focused on just spreading the word about Solana globally. And so we work with a variety of different organizations within the Solana ecosystem. And even when it comes to judging, we have over 50 external judges who are VCs, top founders in the ecosystem, et cetera, contributing to that process. So yeah.
What do you think is kind of driving the overall like talent flow and developer growth to the Solana ecosystem right now? I know I saw the Electric Capital report, I believe earlier this year, behind Ethereum. Solana has seen the most developer growth on that front. Aside from like price action and maybe like the hype, what do you think is driving people to Solana opposed to other chains, or just quote unquote staying on Ethereum, as many have?
Yeah, I think it's a variety of reasons, but fundamentally, and it's the same reason why we're focused on Solana as like a venture fund and accelerator, is that we feel that Solana is really the only place right now that you can build sort of a breakout consumer application. And so that's just due to years of iterating on the infrastructure, taking obviously a very different approach to the infrastructure than you see in like the EVM ecosystems. And so we just feel that Solana's performance, speed, low fees, et cetera, are just by far the best in the industry. And I think a lot of great founders are realizing that too, especially new founders, right, who haven't, maybe they're kind of evaluating the landscape of options of where to build, and they're looking for where they can find product market fit and grow their user base the most without having to worry with that overhead of, which infrastructure to choose if you're choosing between L2s or worrying about fees, et cetera. So that's it in a nutshell, I think.
Okay. I feel like on the front of the consumer applications, I've seen like developments on the Solana side, but then also on the Ethereum side with L2s. We've seen Farcaster do pretty well. What on the Solana side do you think is like the biggest win right now when it comes to consumer apps, or what do you think should be built when it comes to that?
Well, there's certainly a lot of things I want to see built, but what's been built so far.
There's a lot to come, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think on the consumer side, and this sort of follows what we look for in terms of like projects, what they're building is they're opening up some sort of new market. And so obviously meme coins have become a big thing, love it, hate it. It's a fact that people are, spending a lot of time trading, speculating on these assets. And so it makes sense that Solana is a lot of the epicenter of where this is because of its low fees, its great user experience that have allowed for experiences like Pump.fun, if you've heard of that. And so that's been probably, I think in terms of 24-hour revenue, Pump.fun is doing more than all of the blockchains just globally. And so it's pretty unique to see an application actually generate that many fees, even versus like a broad L1 like Ethereum. So I think obviously meme coins have generated a few breakout successes on Solana. But in terms of what I want to see is, I think we're somewhat agnostic. Colosseum is to what use case verticals. Like in our hackathons, we have everything from DeFi to DePIN to gaming to infrastructure. But we do think that there will be more consumer-like applications coming out in the next few years across, especially social. So you see a lot of experimentation in SocialFi. We see a lot of interesting stuff, like I said, in DePIN. So in our last accelerator cohort, we had about 40% of the projects were actually DePIN projects. And so we're pretty excited about what's happening in that space.
Yeah, would you say, and I think going into kind of like the first hackathon, your demo day, everything, what projects stand out to you the most in the Solana ecosystem? Is it the DePIN theme right now? I know that I've heard that you're pretty bullish on DePIN, and I know Decharge was one of the winners of the most recent hackathon, and we actually work with them over at Token Relations. But where do you kind of see like the opportunity there for DePIN that hasn't been or is untapped currently? And you think that like Solana would really accelerate that?
Yeah, I think, well, there have been some notable successes already on Solana when it comes to DePIN. So that's like Helium and HiveMapper. And I think, fundamentally what DePIN does is it just lowers the cost to grow the supply side of any sort of big physical infrastructure project, right? And that can be something like, rolling out a new telecom company or network, but it can also be like GPUs for AI startups, right? So there's like IONET and Cusco and a variety of other kind of like DePIN Airbnb for GPUs type model. And so you mentioned like Decharge. This is another obvious area. There needs to be some sort of physical infrastructure globally for electric vehicles. How do you grow the supply side of making sure that there's enough of these sort of charging stations around the world? And so they're tackling that problem, which we're pretty excited about. But there's many other sort of areas in the economy that we think DePIN can make a big impact on. So
yeah, and I think on the front of DePIN too, it's like not necessarily so like crypto forward. Yes, it is decentralized and it derives from like blockchain technology and other aspects. But for people like Decharge, for example, a lot of people probably won't even know it's built on crypto rails or blockchain rails, I should say. Are you tired of clunky onboarding processes killing your dApp's user growth? Let me introduce you to Passkeys Wallet, enabling one-click Web3 onboarding. Built by Exodus and backed by 9 years of wallet expertise, Passkeys integrates seamlessly into your platform with just a few lines of code and can reduce churn and empower new users to start transacting without leaving your platform. Exodus's developer-friendly toolkit empowers users to create and fund their own wallets directly within your platform. No more drop-off at critical moments, no more seed phrases, extensions, or complicated registration flows. Users simply log in with biometrics for a smooth, secure experience, helping builders retain users and boost engagement. Be among the first to experience the future of crypto. Access Passkeys at passkeys.foundation for more.
Yeah, I'm kind of conflicted about this one. Like some people think, oh, crypto can only go mainstream once, the crypto piece is completely abstracted away from folks. But I kind of think that it's a little bit like the internet where people sort of had to learn certain things. Like they had to learn what a web browser is. They needed to learn like what a website is. And so I actually think long term, like people are actually going to need to know like what a token is and like maybe even what blockchain they're on for the time being. And so I think while there is a lot of abstraction happening, which I think is good for the downstream user experience in terms of onboarding new folks into the industry, I do think that there's some amount of education around just like how a crypto wallet works. And I think people are willing to learn though. Like I think we've seen that with just the numbers of Phantom and MetaMask, right? Millions of people have figured out how to use those, wallets to buy and sell assets and store their assets. And so I think the use case just needs to be hot enough, right? Where people are going to get over that hump of learning like how all of this works. But it'll come.
Yeah, I see both sides of the coin. Like I feel like there's the opportunity to really understand it, get to know it, and you have to educate yourself to get to that point. And then there's also the opportunity for like, I don't need to know how this worked. It just worked, And I think the both can coexist. On the front of the hackathon, obviously there were about 10, correct me if I'm wrong, that made it from, there was like 1,000 projects and then 10 of them were chosen as winners, which is like less than 1% total. How do you kind of look at these projects? What are you looking for? And what are like the biggest themes that are being built in the Solana ecosystem right now?
Sure. So just a small correction. So yes, we had about 1,000 product submissions into the hackathon, and then we had about 34 winners.
Okay.
Of those winners, so a little bit more about Colosseum and how we select products is that once you're basically named a winner, that's when kind of Colosseum, the accelerator, is like, great, you've made it through sort of the gauntlet of the hackathon. We're going to basically interview you just for these like 10 spots in our accelerator program. So there was a much broader number of winners, but yeah, we took what we felt were the top 10 winners out of that kind of pool of winners. So just want to clarify that. And then second thing is like, what do we look for? I think, again, going back to like why we run a hackathon in the first place and why we use it as sort of the talent evaluation tool is that early stage teams, they ship really fast. They're very nimble in terms of trying to find product market fit. They're usually very competitive people, just the characteristic and personality of these folks. And they have usually some sort of big vision that they can sort of communicate to, internally and externally. And so the hackathon sort of serves as sort of a time boxed test for all of those attributes. And so we're really looking for those sort of personality traits and that speed of shipping in the hackathon on a big market opportunity. And so that's really what we look for, and that's why we're sort of agnostic also across like use cases. We're not, while we're excited about DeepIn or DeepIn, we will take a gaming startup or an infrastructure startup because it's really more about the co-founding teams at the level that we invest in and want to start supporting. So hopefully that answers your question.
What are some of the sectors that have been untapped? I know you're agnostic on that front, but surely there were ones where you didn't really get that many submissions for something. Specific sectors like Solana is very generalist, but they have areas where it has done really well. Then there are areas that like maybe haven't been tapped into yet.
Yeah. I think I'd like to see more payments startups. So, I mean, this is the oldest, right, use case in crypto. Like, how do we disrupt Western Union or MoneyGram? These blockchains are inherently global. They're supposed to have very low fees, right? And so I think Solana is uniquely enabling that. There's a few startups that are kind of providing infrastructure like Sphere. There's kind of a layer of software called token extensions and token extensions, which allow you to add more flexibility on things like escrows and things that you would need for like chargebacks for merchants. And so we want to see more startups utilize some of those tools and that infrastructure to build payments related kind of plays in the market. And so I think that'll happen in the next few years, but I think Solana is uniquely sort of enabling something like that.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to founders themselves, how important is their characteristics, how they act, their background? Maybe they've been in Web3, they haven't been, when it comes to being a part of the hackathon and judging their projects and everything holistically?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're a pre-seed fund, and so we're investing very, very early. And so almost all of the projects that we invest in, they're going to pivot probably multiple times. And so we're less tied to the idea and more about the founder themselves. And the founders just, they need to be willing to never kind of give up. I think that's kind of apathy is where a lot of startups fail. So they got to have that drive. They have to be able to, just really show that characteristic I was talking about of like shipping, iterating, talking to customers very early on. So this is another thing we look in the hackathons is like, it's never too early to just put out a tweet and be like, hey, I'm working on this hackathon project. Are there a couple people that want to just like talk to me about the idea and then like beta test when I have like a DevNet solution? And so we see a lot of the best teams, they're just constantly talking to customers, even if there's only a couple of them in their network. And so I think those are the things that, we want to see in terms of the personality of a founder. But it can really vary. I mean, just the global nature of these hackathons. So we have like 95 countries represented in the submissions. That there's a wide variety of cultural aspects. I think that it also is interesting. Even our accelerator program, 60% were from not the US. And so, it's interesting to see kind of different personalities based on where people are coming from. But I think this is going to be a learning experience for us, right? This is the first venture fund that we've run. And so we will learn over time, I think, on like what sort of founder profiles are most successful in crypto.
Mm-hmm. Crypto is pretty inherently global, but when it comes to running a hackathon, an accelerator program on a global scale, how do you go about that? Is it in certain time zones? Is it English speaking? How do you adjust for like the differences there? Yeah,
I think, like I said at the beginning, it's not just Colosseum that's contributing to these hackathons. We work with a lot of groups globally who have more expertise in certain markets than we do. So it is an ecosystem-wide effort to get developers in every region to participate and compete in these hackathons. But yes, in terms of like how we judge projects, you have to be able to speak English. Over time, we hope to kind of expand that requirement to other languages, but our platform that we built is only in English. And most of the startups that we talk to on a daily basis are in English as well. So that's really important. I think we do see, though, teams that are English speaking, but their product is very localized. Crypto is global, but like you take Decharge, for example, that you mentioned. They're building infra for specifically Southeast Asia for like 2-wheel, 3-wheel cars or vehicles. And so they're hyper focused in India on that specific region. And so I think, that's one thing we're really excited about with our model is like, while we do run this like online hackathon, this online accelerator, it opens sort of the aperture of like products that people would be able to build, rather than like forcing someone to come to like Mountain View, California to join an accelerator or join a hackathon, right? And so I think we're really excited just to see the global founder community come out for these events.
Yeah, and it also causes limitations when it comes to like visas, accessibility. Everyone has like lives, believe it or not, outside of crypto, and they have families, or they can't just like get up and go. So I do think that's extremely valuable on that front.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I think that's like one thing we're just excited about crypto broadly, is that like we think it just will open up a lot of economic freedom in the world, because now people can get bank accounts when they couldn't before. They can access like first world financial infrastructure, do stuff like DeFi. But I also think it matters for like, startup founders too, where the internet's amazing because you can, be anywhere in the world and join this like global competition. You don't have to live in Silicon Valley to participate. And so that's like one of our missions, is just like opening up the aperture globally.
Don't let the people out there hear that. In terms of the most recent hackathon, which regions, I know you said it was like 95 countries that participated, but where were you seeing the most traction from?
Yeah, I'd say still the United States has had the most submissions, but I would say Asia Pacific as a region is probably the most popular. So that includes like India, Singapore, Pakistan, part of East Asia, so like Korea, Japan, China. And so like I would just say like, and that sort of mirrors, I would say, crypto generally. Most of crypto trading happens in Asia. And so a lot of entrepreneurs building startups as well in that region. We get a fair amount from like Germany and the UK. So we've seen pretty impressive growth there as well. And so, and then, there's just a long tail, honestly, of countries. There's usually a couple people, from Norway and Australia and Africa, parts of Africa, specifically Nigeria. And so it's interesting to see how certain countries have grown or decreased over time. But that generally is what we saw in our last hackathon.
And you sound American. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I am. Yeah.
How do you kind of advise the American-based companies in like the current U.S. regulatory environment, especially when they're so early stage? They might not have like the war chest that, someone like Coinbase might have when navigating the legal landscape in the U.S. Do you guys kind of provide resources on that front, or how do you go about that?
We do. We as a fund don't provide legal advice, but we have a sort of a network of law firms that have a lot of experience. And so this is actually something that was really important that I wanted to solve just based on my experience with the hackathons with the Solana Foundation, is that you have these really talented founders, they compete in the hackathon, they win, and then they're like, what's next? How do I actually like start a company? How do I raise seed funding? And so like a lot of what we've been doing with Colosseum is to make it very easy to streamline that process, so we can connect them with the right legal resources to get started, get them connected with the right investors once they're ready to raise their seed round. And so just in the true word of acceleration, like try to get people across the line much faster post hackathon.
Yeah, I've met a number of founders who they just met at a hackathon, they were working together, and suddenly they're running a business. So that's definitely a reality that a lot of people have, and suddenly they're just running a business and they don't even know how to do it. So I think that's super valuable. When it comes to the people participating in this program, what percentage would you say are Web3 crypto native developers versus people who might have an interest in the space, have been dabbling with the codes? This podcast is sponsored by Galaxy. If you're immersed in the world of Web3, Galaxy is a name you need to know. As a decentralized super app with an impressive 21 million users boasting over 100 million monthly transactions, Galaxy is elevating its impact with Gravity, the magnet chain for Web3. Gravity is designed for full chain abstraction, zero knowledge proof-based privacy, and rapid transaction speeds, all coming together to offer an unparalleled user experience. Gravity opens the door for developers to effortlessly build on the largest on-chain distribution platform, and for users, it promises an even smoother, more secure journey through Web3. It's not about being on-chain, it's about being on the right chain every single time. Galaxy is on a mission to onboard the world to Web3, and Gravity is the magnetic force that will propel the vision forward. Ready to launch your Web3 journey? Build the future on Gravity. Visit gravity.xyz for more information.
Yeah, so when we've run surveys on this, and about 50% of the people who have participated in our hackathons have never built on a blockchain before.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty split on just people who, on the nights and weekends have been following crypto. Maybe they work at Google or a developer at, some Wall Street firm, and they just want to dip their toes in. And a lot of times these people kind of just get hooked over the course of 6 weeks. And so that's kind of actually where the hackathon started. When the first hackathon happened, there were basically very few developers building on Solana. And so we're like, how do we convince people outside of the crypto sphere to actually join and give this a try? And so that is maintained being a primary goal with these hackathons. And so but then there's a fair amount of like very experienced developers, right, who have been building on Ethereum for a long time, or or Solana for the past few years. And what we see is, interestingly enough, is that a lot of the best teams, they enter one hackathon as like a newbie developer. Maybe they just left their Web2 job, and then over the course they enter multiple hackathons throughout a couple of years. And by the last hackathon, they're actually building like a full startup, and that's their intention. And so that's another thing, kind of getting back to what you were mentioning about what we look for, is we want to see like consistent participation and sort of iteration on the product. And we definitely see that a lot with people coming from, Web2 and then spending some time in Web3 and actually building something interesting.
Do you find that one group is more successful than the other? Like people who are not Web3 native are potentially doing better, or the ones who have been in the space for a while are just doing better?
That's a great question. We haven't looked at the data specifically on that yet, but I would say anecdotally, there's pros and cons to each group. I would say a lot of people coming from, outside the industry, it takes a while to just like learn like what crypto is useful for, which we believe is like opening up new markets. And so people try to like map Web2 ideas onto Web3, and that usually doesn't work quite well. But on the other hand, like they come in with a very fresh perspective, and sometimes come in with much better sort of product instincts when it comes to like user experience. And then for the crypto native folks, sometimes they're just lost sort of in the sauce in terms of like
they're very deep in the
building
weeds,
they're building like really, really interesting like technology, whether that's like zero knowledge proofs or something on the cutting edge, but they actually have very little like consumer demand, or they're not opening up some new market. They're just sort of building for the sake of building. And so I would say we're going to be watching that more closely over time, but honestly I wouldn't say one group has been more successful than the other.
Okay. And on the front of getting non-Web3 people into the space, is there something specific like Colosseum is doing to make that happen? You got a strategy on that front, or you're just like letting people free flow in? No. I mean, like my background is in marketing. One of my co-founders, Clay, his background is in, product marketing as well. And so we, and then Nate, who's our third co-founder, who built out this sort of custom platform to run these hackathons in our accelerator. Like we are very focused on experimenting with new marketing channels to find these developers and entice them to join the hackathons. And that's what I've spent
most of my time doing at the Solana Foundation is trying to find which acquisition channels are working better than others. And we think that's sort of a unique thing to our venture fund. Like a lot of venture funds have different sort of strategies around enticing and creating deal flow for themselves, right? Like some venture funds, will use their own personal network. Like Mark Andreessen has a great network in Silicon Valley. So a lot of people come to them for that. Or maybe they use like the media, right? Media has become like a very big lever for venture funds, right? They have like a podcast, they have a newsletter, they're creating a lot of content that's attracting people. And so, or they just hire a bunch of associates, right, to go out and find interesting entrepreneurs to invest in. Our model is that we sort of have built this hackathon product, and we use more traditional marketing channels to attract people in mass into the funnel. So that's what we're focused on.
I mean, there are a lot of hackathons out there, and I wanted to ask you about this earlier on, but then we got into a conversation of founders, what makes a good founder, and that's a good conversation. But on the front of hackathons, what makes a good one? Because there's so many of them out there. I'm sure developers have a ton of options to choose from, even probably within the Solana ecosystem. I could imagine there's a number of initiatives on that front. So what do you really do to make Colosseum stand out? I know you guys have the 3 pillars, you have the venture fund, et cetera. But what do you think is really driving people to come to yours opposed to others?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. Well, one is that our hackathons really aren't structured like a traditional hackathon. So for those that are listening, if you've participated in a hackathon before, usually you go to like a company cafeteria or a conference center, and it's like you drink a bunch of Red Bull. It's in person over the course of like 48 hours. So a lot of like ETH global events are like this, and that's great. Like it's a great sort of bonding experience with people IRL. You get to hack in, as the name says, on a basically like a proof of concept for a short amount of time, but it's a very sort of ephemeral experience. Versus ours are only online. They're over the course of several weeks, right? And so what you're building is a little bit more long-term in nature. And it fits well with sort of like a traditional like engineering sprint in terms of like you get a month and a half basically to go from idea to potentially like a DevNet like demo. And so those are some just structurally different things. And then the last thing I would say is that we aren't prescriptive with sort of the prizes. Like we'll say, hey, we have these broad prize categories based on use case verticals. So we'll have a DePIN track, we'll have a gaming track, infrastructure, but we don't say anything more than that. Versus like a traditional hackathon, there's often like sponsored like bounties. So like, hey, Uniswap or company X is like sponsoring this prize, but you got to use Uniswap in your project submission. And so we don't want people to use sort of integrations or products for the sake of them. We want people to start with like their own creative idea that they want to build a startup around for the next decade, and then use whatever tools they want to get to that, that end. And so those are some things that are pretty different about our hackathons than traditional hackathons. And even to the point where like, we love to see innovation and experimentation, but at the end of the day, like it's mostly a startup competition. And I think this is something we try to communicate to people participating, is that like it's great that you've coded a lot and worked a lot on this demo, but the business component, like was this a good idea in the first place even to build, is equally as important about how much work you did during the hackathon, which is a little bit different. So those are some differences. Yeah,
but they are focused on Solana. Maybe not like a specific product like Uniswap you said, but it's got to be on Solana.
Yes, yeah. For the time being, I think we are super excited about Solana, and we just feel like a lot of the best founders in crypto are kind of magnetized towards that ecosystem, and we want to help support the best. And so and a number of them came out of Solana hackathons like Jito, Tensor, others. Are there is there a specific startup that came out of a hackathon that you kind of like point to as a metric of success, or like to hype up the hackathon people, like, hey, you could be the next XYZ? So this is, we have several startups that, their founders started in our hackathons on our website. But as part of our accelerator program, a lot of those folks have decided to give back and become mentors in our program. And so we've had like Lucas, who's the founder of Jito, come and talk to our first cohort. Richard, who's the founder of Tensor. Yeah, I think there's a list of about 20 folks that we have that kind of give back in that way. And yeah, we hope that the batch that we just invested in and is going to grow to be really, big ecosystem projects, and then they can give back by talking to the next batch. And so, yeah, we're just trying to create that flywheel for the ecosystem of just creating really great products, growing those, like becoming successful, and then helping the next wave of entrepreneurs come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of the future, to wrap things up, where do you kind of see Colosseum going in the future? Obviously, you have the venture fund, you have the hackathons, accelerators, but what do you really want it to be known for in the broader crypto ecosystem?
Yeah, I think where we're spending a lot of time right now is, like I said, we have this platform where we run these hackathons. It's a website. You can sign up for an account, participate in our hackathons. But
what's it called?
It's called. It's just Colosseum.org.
There you go.
So, one thing that we noticed that we ran sort of an experiment in our first hackathon is that we're like, hey, let's just like create a public profile for all of the people who signed up for the hackathon and put them into basically a directory, and then you can basically filter that directory based on like what experience you have or where you're located. And so we did that because we noticed that a lot of people were finding their co-founder as part of that directory. Like a lot of people just are coming from random places across the world. They don't know anyone else in crypto, so they use that directory to find their basically future co-founder for the hackathon. And so we noticed that a good percentage of the winners actually used that and found their teammates through that portal. And so we're going to basically focus a lot of our time in the short and medium term to like building out more of like a mature product around co-founder matching. So basically, to answer your question, is like we want to be known as like sort of the starting point of startup creation in the crypto ecosystem. And we want to be there from when you get the idea to when you find your co-founder to when you're actually ready to go full time and get your first round of financing. And so, yeah, that's what we want to be known for.
Super exciting. I love that co-founder matching. Is it like a dating thing where you like this, we like this, let's build it together?
Maybe a little less like swiping and more just like, hey, I think your experience is really cool. Would you want to use, basically, it
like
fits
LinkedIn.
well with the hackathon. Yeah, it's like LinkedIn, where you can message someone, and instead of just being like, all right, let's go build something together, there's a hackathon. There's an event that you can kind of be like, all right, we don't know if we're going to have a good co-founder relationship, so let's go test it out in the hackathon. If we do well in the hackathon and we don't, kill each other as part of the process,
we get along, right?
Maybe, we get along. Like maybe this is something that can become a more long-term startup. So
awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Matty, before we wrap things up, last two questions. What is something that you're watching in the crypto ecosystem right now outside of everything we've talked about?
It's a good question. I think, we are really interested to see what happens with sort of the regulation in the United States around crypto. I think there's been sort of a shift, I think, in terms of becoming more friendly to entrepreneurs in the US. And so I think that's a positive shift that we want to see in the future. But at the end of the day, like we are global, and so we want to support founders globally. But there are a lot of interesting teams that are building in the United States that we want to continue to support. So that's one thing. I'd say second thing is, we're looking for interesting use cases, right? Or interesting new technology to experiment in the hackathon, right? We see a lot of interesting things like blinks and ZK compression coming out of the Solana ecosystem. And so we want to see more experimentation with those tools in our hackathons. And so, yeah, we're just really excited to see both, regulation, I think, getting much better, and that's allowing people to create a lot more interesting technology and build startups. And so, yeah, pretty excited about it all.
Amazing. And can you leave us with a piece of advice, maybe something you've carried with you throughout your time in the Solana ecosystem?
That, to to succeed, you're gonna need to go through some bear markets and some tough times, I would say. But you'll come out stronger if you're, true to yourself. If you, keep your eye on the prize, and you have a group of people that can help support you right through it. And so I think the Solana ecosystem had a rough couple years, just with the whole FTX blow up, and then it was, but what was amazing is that it kind of washed out a lot of the tourists and people that actually weren't there to build like novel technology and startups. And so a lot of those people, though, that were truly in it for the tech, stuck together, and they got through a really tough bear market. And I think, while the market seems to be in a good place right now, it could go back to something like that in the future. And so it's important to endure, basically.
No, I super agree with that. Matty, thank you for coming on the show today.